Mayor Truitt,
Here.
Vice Mayor Alton,
Here.
Councilmember Wolcott,
Here.
Councilmember Hall, Councilmember Woodard,
Here.
Councilmember Williams,
Here.
Councilmember Villanueva. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first item will be presentation and discussion regarding HUD Annual Action Plan 2010-2011 and Consolidated Plan 2010-2014.
Mayor Truitt, members of City Council, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At the last City Council meeting, Council table the consideration of the consolidated plan and also the annual plan in order to give council the opportunity to provide more detailed input and consideration of those two items. I'd like to present the consolidated plan first for your consideration and give you a little bit of background, and then I'll pause and ask for questions and additional direction. And then after that, I'll present the annual plan, because clearly one leads to the other. Just a quick refresher on the consolidated plan. It is mandated by HUD in order for us to be eligible for community development block grant funds, and the consolidated plan is a 5-year plan. It's very important to keep in mind that it's not as fluid as a general plan, for example, where there's a lot of local autonomy. Our consolidated plan has to follow HUD program goals. It has to, which include decent housing, suitable living environment, and expanding economic opportunities. If council does move forward with the recommended consolidated plan, the primary focus will be to benefit low to moderate income persons. That would be how we'd meet the national objective, which is mandated by HUD. Keep in mind that there's two funding beneficiaries. They fall into two categories. One is simply described as, yep, I can. It's people with income levels of, what percentage, Christina? At or below 80% of median income. At or below 80% of median income. It's low to moderate income is that definition.
80% of median income.
Yep. Okay.
Excuse me.
How do you find people that fit into that category?
It is actually, in order to identify the area of need, in other words, by census tract, that is from the census data. Otherwise, if we're talking about a limited clientele program, then people have to qualify on an individualized basis.
Well, I'm thinking about, a single-person family household, not a single person, but a single parent working makes that or less, and they don't live in the old town site. How do you find them?
Yeah, they are eligible, and actually they more or less have to find us. We promote and advertise the programs that we have available, and they will ask us about it. Excuse me. And one of the first things we say, "Are you eligible?"
How do they?
And then privately, we ask them about their income levels, and they have to sign an affidavit to make sure that they are qualified for it.
Okay, and that's true with every one of these things, with the exception of OTS has got to have the infrastructure, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, there's no way to get around that.
That's correct.
Okay, but the three other items don't necessarily fall into the OTS. They can fall into individual?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. So there's the area of benefit, which are primarily capital projects. Those can only be done in the original town site because that's the only area of the city where residents all qualify for low to moderate income, that area, and that's it. Just to let you all know, after this new census data comes out, we'll review the census tract data, including incomes, to make sure that there are not other areas of the city, like Section 10 or Section 15, that do not qualify. They may now become eligible, and then that way we'd be able to extend these program benefits to other areas. But for right now, it's only OTS, but we'll keep track of that. And the other one I think I just explained through the Vice Mayor's questions about limited clientele. If an individual has a low to moderate income, but they live in, could even be Sun City Grand, Bell West Ranch, or whatever, if they are a low-income person, they can take advantage of the HUD programs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeff, could I ask?
Sure.
Do you know, I should know this, but I don't, how a census tract is defined? I mean, is it a population number that drives the census tract, or is it geography, or is it a combination, or what?
It's actually a combination. It's based on population, but it's also population density. In other words, I'm just picking a number. Let's just say it's 10,000 people make up a census tract. In an urban area, it could be a very small area. In a rural area, it could be expansive. So again, it's a combination of the two. Does that make sense? Okay. We've been working on the consolidated plan now for a number of months. The public input and outreach was extensive. We had our first meeting with the Community Development Block Grant Commission and discussed priorities for the plan in December. Then we went out to the public and asked them for their input on the priorities in December and January. We held a formal public hearing in February before the commission.
Excuse me, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
When you went out to the public, what public did you go out to?
Candidly, anybody that would listen, we advertise it throughout the city of Surprise.
And where was the meeting held?
Christine, do you want to talk about where the meetings were held?
A lot of the public input that we received was through surveys that were sent out to area nonprofits as well as posted on the website. So we had a good number of residents that put in information and answered those surveys. And we also had the quality of life meetings, CDBG meetings, either in the public safety building or here in City Hall. And those were advertised in the newspaper.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So the draft was put together on the 26th. It was available for public review the entire month of March, and the Commission held their final public hearing on March 3rd and unanimously recommended the consolidated plan to City Council. And we are here this evening to have the actual public hearing later on this evening as part of the regular council agenda. Just a reminder, the plan must be submitted to HUD on May 15th, or else we will not be eligible for funds. Again, a quick review over the past 3 years. The accomplishments for Community Development Block Grant funds really have been working on flood drain improvements in the OTS and also some sidewalk connectivity items. Just to provide a connection between the consolidated plan, the annual plan, the best way to do that is graphically. We have the consolidated plan, which is a 5-year plan. It's a strategic plan. It is a plan, but it can be modified each year should the Commission choose to do that. But then each year, the annual plan is the actual implementation plan of the 5-year plan, and that's where you'll see the specific projects. And I'll present the specific projects for next year in a couple of minutes. So these are the priorities that we came up with, and again, this is based on the surveys that Christina just mentioned, interviews, and then also input from the Community Development Block Grant Commission and the Quality of Life Commission. It's interesting that many of these priorities are somewhat similar to what Ken's going to be talking about in the next work session item, and that's transportation, housing, and job creation. So those are of the top 8. So you look at these priorities, and then we think about what projects could we do to hit the priorities that we're hearing from our residents. And this is where we come with the 5-year program, and I'll go through these very quickly. This next year, we're recommending housing rehabilitation, which would be the minor repair of 20 units. And let me stress that the housing rehabilitation can be done citywide, not just in the OTS. The next year, we'd like to do youth training, job training. We've never done that before in the city of Surprise, but we continue to hear from families saying, I really want to make sure my children are ready to go out in the working world. Yes, sir.
Job creation, is that in a partnership, mentoring partnership with the city in various city programs that we currently do in rec and so forth? Riding along with sanitation and learning the jobs? Is that it, or is it actual training at some place?
Both. Our goal is to use job training by just what you're suggesting. Could be CRS, could be here businesses at City Hall. But if an individual business wants to move forward with us and do a youth training program, and they can assure us that it's income qualified, the individual, then certainly we'd be willing to create public-private partnerships to do that.
And do the students then get paid for these jobs?
They could get paid for it. It depends on how we budget it. It depends whether the business wants to be subsidized for part of it. But if there's a way for us to either do an internship, a stipend, or something of that nature, we could certainly do that. But really the goal of this isn't so much to make money for the families, to provide the training and the experience.
Sure.
Okay. In year 3, we'd like to come back to the OTS and do some park improvements. Year 4, additional sidewalk connectivity in the OTS. And then the last year would be facade rehab improvements, which we've been talking about here at the council level for a number of years. So keep in mind, too, the next 2 years would be projects that would be citywide, and the 3 years after that, because their capital improvements could only be accomplished in the OTS. And those are the recommendations of both the Community Development Block Grant Commission and staff, and I think this is a good slide for me to stop and ask if there's any detailed questions.
Yes, thank you. First of all, the first program year, the housing rehabilitation with the minor repair of 20 units, is that external repair, internal repair, a combination of both? What does that really entail?
It's a combination. It's to really make sure that the units that people are living in are livable. And by example, it could be roofing repairs, windows, HVAC, but it could be enhancements to plumbing. It's not cosmetic, though. It's not facade rehab. It's really to make sure that the unit is livable. If someone can't afford to repair their roof, this is how we can accomplish that.
Is there a code standard that we're trying to get to, like perhaps bringing units up to a code standard? Is that what?
Yes, that's exactly right. They would have to meet the International Building Code.
Okay. I just have a question about the fifth year of the projects, the OTS commercial residential facade. And as you mentioned, that we've been talking about that at council level for a really long time. And so I think one of the first things that just kind of raised a red flag for me when I saw this on the agenda last time and why I seconded the motion to discuss it is really because it has been something that we've been talking about for a long time. And I thought I understood that was a real priority of yours, Roy, that I wondered why we didn't start there and reorder these priorities and do that OTS commercial piece first right out of the chute.
Mm-hmm. Let me try to address that and let you know my thought process, but we could certainly amend it. Councilman Villanueva a couple meetings ago also asked staff to look into the creation of a heritage district in the OTS. We're very excited about that, excuse me, and we're having the planners work on that right now. We're going to bring that back to council in a workshop. I believe it's either late May or early June. Recognize the obviously the starting of the city, the founding of the city, and the OTS, and so on. I think that's going to generate some buzz and excitement in the OTS. I think that will be a better lead-in then to doing facade rehab. The second thing I'm very concerned about, though, is if we do a facade rehab program, it will be important for us to either do it as a very low-interest loan or, more likely, and what I'd recommend to you, as part of a grant program where the property owner, business owner has some skin in the game. Now, how you break that up, whether it's 50-50, 80-20, 75-25, is clearly policy, but I think it's critical for us to make sure they have some money in there, or else we are getting close to gifting it. Let me expand on that just one more second. If we did it now, next year, I really don't think, considering the state of the economy, that we'd have many takers. I don't think there are many folks out there that have even $1,000 to match whatever loan program we came up with. So having said that, I'd be very comfortable moving up the facade rehab program to year 2 or year 3, but I'd be uncomfortable doing it next year because I think we have to generate momentum and interest in it first.
And so really, my question is, can we be nimble enough to respond to opportunities as they come along and reorder these priorities as we go, or once we submit it, it has to go in this order?
We can remain nimble, absolutely. If next year we decide that the economy is rebounding, we've gone out in the community and all of a sudden there's a lot of interest, yes, I'd be willing to play along. Moving it next year from year 5 to year 2, we can do that.
Okay, that makes me more comfortable. Thank you.
Question, Jeff. I, too, am concerned about the commercial facade improvement on Grand, just because it ties in, the timing ties in with going to 6 lanes on Grand and a bunch of other things that are going to go on there. It seems like that would, now, if we move it up to year 2, okay, but in reading the National Citizen Survey, one of the top priorities that the people felt we had a big hole was job creation.
I agree.
And if we can create jobs on Grand, that's a big deal to me. Now, the other question I got, though, is I don't want to usurp the CDBG's commission. I mean, they looked at this and they agreed to the priorities. I mean, they gave you strong feedback. This is the priorities they wanted.
Their goal is always to try to get as many things accomplished as soon as possible, which is very similar to council. If I ask them, would you like all 5 of these things done next year, they'd say absolutely. So it's always challenging for them to prioritize. I think the housing rehab next year is pretty important because we have many people out there in need considering the economy. But the OTS park improvements, the sidewalk connectivity, sliding those down, I'm sure would be very broadly supported by the commission. Okay.
My question on housing rehabilitation, does it include raising a house that's burnt out?
It would not. And
the house I'm talking about, Roy,
yeah.
Roy, right?
We're actually working that on a separate matter, but
At a separate matter?
yeah. But the bigger issue is if you look at the funding available, we're only talking about $270,000, and I'd be concerned about spending that much money on one unit.
Yeah. Okay. So you think raising that would cost a lot of money?
Quite a bit. Yep.
Jeff?
Sir.
The housing rehab, is it for renters? Is it for homeowners? Who's it for?
It's for property owners.
Property owners.
Yes.
And they have to be there. They have to be owner occupied.
Address that. Yes.
Okay, and we follow on that? We qualify people for that? We do a property search and all that?
A lot of the people that we get are referred to us through code enforcement or through other avenues, and through advertisement. And so when we start the process, we qualify the family, and these rehabilitation projects have a forgivable loan deed of trust.
How soon is that?
It's as soon as before we can start. They have to sign the deed of trust, and so we have a schedule of 5 years, 10 years, depending on how much we invest in the home. And so anytime there's any change of ownership or occupancy, then at that time, we can call the loan due.
We've done this before, correct, in previous years?
Yes, we have done
How many
it.
houses have we rehab?
We've done, if I had to take a guess right now, I would say probably about 100 minor repairs in the past. Major repairs, we've probably done about 50. We've
Have
done,
any repeaters?
well, we have some that use different funding sources where you can't get an entire complete project out of one, so you have to use a couple of different funding sources in order to bring it up to code. That's the biggest issue, but they don't repeat the program once after another. If they've already benefited once, we do not have them come back.
Is there a lien priority on this?
We take second position to their primary lien, but at the time that they try to refinance, if they're trying to do a refinance with a cash-out situation, then our lien is due. We do not subordinate to that. We will only subordinate in those cases where we're making the primary loan more affordable with a lower interest rate or something like that. But there is no cash-out. We don't subordinate to that.
Who holds the, so we're not loaning, we're granting.
It's called a forgivable loan. And so what happens is, for example, if we have a 10-year loan with a a $10,000 loan with a 5-year lien with $2,000 forgiven per year, so after 5 years they owe nothing. There is no interest, there are no fees associated to it, but for every year that they live there, after 5 years, then it's completely satisfied.
Are there any homes out there that have more than one lien from the city on it already?
Yes.
How
Because
many?
I would probably say less than 5. Less than 5. And those were only major projects where you had to do a major housing rehabilitation in order to make the home livable.
Who underwrites the loan? Who qualifies the people?
Oh, we do. Staff does.
And, you draw all the documents and everything?
Correct. We use
You use a title company?
No. We use, what we do is we do title searches, assure ownership, we do county searches, that sort of thing. We qualify the family, and then we go through the recording process and everything for that. The underwriting is done per HUD standard, and so we're audited a couple times a year to assure that every one of our clients, in fact, do meet the underwriting standards as set forth by the grantor of the funding.
One last question, and that is, if there is mechanic liens or other liens, not lending liens.
Right.
Okay, are we subordinate to those?
I have not seen any mechanic liens that we have been subordinate to in our title searches and our other searches that we do.
How about welfare liens or liens for taxes and that nature?
Tax liens have to be satisfied before we will come in and do a project.
Do we help fund those tax liens?
No. No.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay. I think what I'm hearing from council, then, I would suggest this, then, that we could move the facade rehab program from 2014, slide that up to 2012, and move the other two down, if council's comfortable with that. And we could yellow sheet that and have that back at your places for the regular meeting this evening, if I'm understanding what I'm hearing from council.
Well, what do you guys think?
Are we looking at, through the chair? Sorry, go ahead. So moving, just for clarification, OTS park improvements and sidewalk connectivity down, moving OTS commercial residential facade improvements up to the number 3 spot in that list of priorities, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with that. I would almost move it to number 2, but I like the youth training piece. So it's a catch-all. So that works for me. How does Councilmember Villanueva feel? Don't mean to put you on the spot, Roy. Yeah,
that coincide with pretty close to their schedule?
Yeah, the Grand Avenue project, I don't recall when the startup is, and I don't see Bob Beckley here, but that's an 18-month project, if it's on time. We'll cross our fingers. So by the time we get that wrapped up, then the facade rehab would be, what, a year behind it.
Yeah, okay. But they also will remain flexible where we can change these going down the year.
Well, let me add one more thing, and this is important, and I'm nervous to talk about it, but we think we're close. The LDS Church that we usually work with on Pride Day has stepped forward, and they want to do another Pride Day this fall, using all their folks, which we're excited about. And they said, where would you like to do it? And we said, you know where we could use some help, because I keep hearing it from council, and that's the Grand Avenue corridor. The reason this is important is because one of the first things we do is we go out and canvass the site, talk to all the property owners and make sure they're interested, make sure we can go on their property and clean it up. So what we'll do is we'll kill two birds with one stone. When we staff it and go out and talk to the business owners and property owners, we'll say, one, are you interested in participating in Pride Day this fall? And then two, if we did a loan program or a grant program 2 years from now, would you be interested? And that will be able to gauge interest. And if after this fall, if Christine and I find out that there's, let's just say 5 businesses that want to play along and want to invest, then we'll come back and recommend that you bump it up, if that works for council.
Jeff? And that's fine. I'd like to be, or something in front of us, that this doesn't happen again where you get everybody else's input each year. I would like to see what is going to be considered for the following year, prior to, 15 days before the cutoff. And that's the flexibility of the whole thing. I think that's great. Is there a way to, Section 10 and Section 15, that just doesn't sound appealing. Have we ever thought about going out to those areas and say, what do you want to be called? Shouldn't we give some personalization to those areas? They don't have homeowners associations, I'm sure.
We can. My initial reaction, first time I'm really thinking this through, is as part of the village planning process, which you're going through. As you know, we're not going to have Village 1, Village 2, Village 3. We're going to have names for them. And that's Village 5. I'm sorry, but I think it's 5. That's the next one we're going to start this winter. And I think an important part of that, and I agree with your suggestion, is to get the community involved and say, what do you guys want to call yourselves? What do you want to be identified with? So we can roll that into that
So much better
process.
than Section 10 or 15.
I agree.
That's it.
Jeff, one of the things that I want to remind everyone that we have citizens that have one input on this. We just can't change everything if we want to adhere to what the citizens want. So I would suggest, we really pay attention to when he has these hearings on what the citizens want.
And just if it's okay with council too, so we're better about this next year, we'll get input from residents, Quality of Life Commission, Committee of the Whole, but then we have a 30-day period where it's out for public review. I'll make a point to make sure that we have a work session with council next year during that 30-day period, so you'll see it well in advance, if that works for everybody.
That's great.
Okay, very good.
Councilman Woodard, did you have something?
Yeah, Jeff, sidewalk connectivity ADA retrofit, $270,000. How much is that actually going to give us? Do you have any idea?
It really depends on the actual improvements we're talking about. Sidewalk connectivity can be things like actual concrete sidewalks. It can be asphalt bike paths, but it also includes things like benches, landscaping, striping on the street. So it's hard for me to put a linear distance on it for you. What we do is we have a long-range plan for the whole area in the OTS, and what we do is we break it down into manageable chunks. We'll bid it, and we'll get as close as we can to $270,000. Currently, the bidding environment's outstanding, best it's ever been, because people are hungry for work. So I can't give you a very specific example, but can we get something that has positive community impact with $270,000? Yes, we can.
What you just said is interesting to me because it says sidewalk connectivity and ADA retrofit, yet we're talking about bike lanes, striping. So it's kind of like working with the budget. The description or the title doesn't always describe what's going to be there. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I have direction. We'll yellow sheet it and have it back for you for the regular council meeting. Let me move into the annual plan. I think this could go pretty quick. So this next year, we would do the housing rehabilitation. We would hit 20 homes, and again, they would all have to be low to moderate income, and this is an area where we could definitely hit Section 10, 15, OTS, anywhere in the city where the recipient would qualify. We also talked about, for the first time, per council's direction, actually doing public service programs using community development block grant funds. We went through a process of taking in applications. As I mentioned during our last work session, the Community Development Block Grant Commission, considering their new commission, did a really good job reviewing those. If I remember correctly, Councilman Hall was at the meeting and saw them do their thing, and it was really a good meeting. The two projects that we're recommending, and this was also unanimously recommended for approval by the Commission, was to fund the St. Mary's Food Bank Alliance to do emergency food boxes to the tune of $35,000. And that really is exactly what it is. If someone's down their luck, they're foreclosed, they're hungry, they're going to provide emergency food boxes for people in need. They would have to be income qualified. And again, that's anybody in the city of Surprise that qualifies. We would also fund the interfaith community care to provide adult daycare, youth daycare, and also counseling. That amount would be not to exceed $20,000. Again, that would be on an individualized basis. People would have to be qualified on a unit basis, not to exceed $20,000.
We reimburse on that one, right, Jeff?
That's correct. Yeah. That's exactly right. So the total budget would be, the rehab would be $270, the public services, which is the food bank and interfaith, would be $55. Administrative cost is $81 for a total of $406,000. Just when you look at the budget, keep in mind that there is a carryover from past projects of $559,000 for a grand total of $965. But we think, finishing up the sidewalk improvements, food boxes, and the interfaith project all is a really good package of improvements for next year. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Will that sidewalk connectivity along Smoky Drive, Jeff, will that enable total path from Old City Hall or Coseta Apartments, that area there, all the way to the 99-cent store shopping center without getting on the road?
That is what is being designed right now, is going from Old City Hall all the way through to Smoky Drive to Bell Road. So just depending on what the bids come through to see what complete project we can do. But yes, that is what's being designed.
Okay.
Councilwoman Moka.
Thank you. The administrative allocation appears to be around 20% of the total. Is that typical?
It is typical, yes, 20%.
Seems awfully high to me, especially for the, I don't know, I mean, just maybe you could get into greater detail as to why it is at around 20%.
That 20% is the HUD allowable guideline for that. Mm-hmm. We do use that to supplement staff on that. If we don't use the 20% of the community development block grant funds, then we have to take some of that staffing money from the general fund. It's a way for us to leverage it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So we will not change anything on the annual action plan. We will yellow sheet the consolidated plan. Christina's going to disappear and run upstairs and do that, and we'll have that on the regular council agenda in about an hour. Thank you very much for the input. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for saying.
Going on to the next item, Mayor. Next item.
Yes, please.
Presentation and discussion regarding National Citizen Survey, and that will be Ken Lynch Communications.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. It'll take me a moment to get to my presentation.
Well, you got that thing layered. That's 6 deep, huh?
There we are. Well, good evening. I stand before you this evening to present to you the draft report from the National Citizen Survey. It's a little lengthy. I'll probably be talking for about 30 or 35 minutes, but it's a very interesting report. There's a lot of great information in here that we've never had the opportunity to ponder before. And, of course, at any time, please stop me and ask any questions that I might be able to help you with. I'll start with a little background. The purpose of the National Citizen Survey is to identify strengths and weaknesses in the community and in our city services. When we say in the community, we mean the characteristics of the community, which is one thing that the National Citizen Survey measures. The immediate uses of this information, that is something we can use right away as the Council desires, is to plan for the immediate future, ways to allocate particular resources, take a look at how we're performing, and also to program and evaluate certain programs and policies that the city is undertaking. There are longer-term uses, of course, strategic planning at the council level, ways to improve our services, get more engagement with the community, ultimately generate a better quality of life, and build stronger public trust. That longer-term benefit is maximized with a biannual process. There are over 500 cities that use the National Citizen Survey, including 18 in Arizona. Most of them do a biannual process so that in the future you can compare your benchmarks against your own previous performance rather than the national database, which we have to do this first time around. A few mention on methods before we dive into the result. It was a mail survey. All mailings were done, of course, within the city limits. There were 3 mailings a week apart. The first postcard announcing that the survey was coming was sent the 19th of February. A week later, the survey instrument itself was sent, and then a week following that, the survey instrument was sent again to remind people who maybe ignored it or accidentally tossed it the first time. Residents were instructed to discard that third mailing if they had already received and answered the survey. It's a representative sample of 1,200 households in Surprise. 409 survey results were obtained. That's a 37% return rate. That's the high end of normal for this type of survey. The range is 25 to 40%. Again, we're at 37%. The confidence level is plus or minus 5%. It is statistically weighted to reflect our population. The National Citizen Survey routinely uses the best available information to weight their survey results. In this case, they use the 2008 American Community Survey census estimates. They group things into 8 broad categories, combining characteristics and services. You see them there. I won't read down the list for you because we'll be going through these. 5 of them relate directly to city services. Others are more about community characteristics. We did compare our results, and I want to talk with you about that for just a minute before we get into the results themselves. Our results are compared to the National Research Center database of about 500 municipalities across the country. They went ahead and did the comparison when a similar question was asked and at least 5 communities in that database participated. On average, when they did comparisons, more than 100 jurisdictions were compared to our results. Also to point out, as National Citizen Survey pointed out to me, that service to service is not a valid comparison because some services always rate higher than others. Streets always loses to fire. But a more accurate comparison is services in Surprise compared to similar services in other communities, and that's what we've done, and that's what you'll see. The comparisons are labeled above, similar, and below. Above and below are pretty self-explanatory. Similar is when our results are within 3 points on the 100-point scale of the average response in comparison jurisdictions. Most questions that people were asked were answered on a 4-point scale: excellent, good, fair, and poor. And we did ask additional questions in addition to the ones that are part of the basic National Citizen Survey. We did ask this question: to what extent would you support increasing taxes and or fees to ensure city services continue at their current levels? We also asked, how likely or unlikely would you be to use a local bus service throughout the city, to pay a fee to ride a local bus service throughout the city, to use commuter rail along Grand Avenue to a light rail connection in Phoenix if you could leave your vehicle at a park and ride lot in Surprise. We also asked one open-ended question, which is, you tell us, what are the 3 biggest changes the city of Surprise could make that would encourage you to remain a resident of the city for the next 5 to 10 years. With that, unless there are any questions initially from council, we'll just go ahead and dive in and start talking about results. Shall we do that? Very good. The overall quality of life and community quality, we'll talk about that first. The percentage of positive responses to the overall quality of life is 87%. That means people who responded that the quality of life is either good or excellent. 87% of people responded either good or excellent. Your neighborhood as a place to live, 86 responded good or excellent. Surprise overall as a place to live, 90% responded good or excellent. Would you recommend living in Surprise to others? 91% said they were likely or somewhat likely or very likely to do so. And do you plan to stay in Surprise in the next 5 years? 87% said they are somewhat or very likely to do so. By the way, the breakdown of these somewhats and varies and good and excellence are in your complete report. So you can see the differences between those two. When you compare those to the national database, we are above the average response in all of those categories. So that is an initial broad overview of the response the community gave in this survey. Our community characteristics, the things that received the most favorable ratings were the cleanliness of the community and the overall appearance of the community. The things that received the least favorable ratings were ease of bus travel and the employment opportunities that are available in Surprise. We'll move on to talk a little about community design. These are community characteristics that we're talking about now as opposed to city services. People were asked about the ease of car travel around the city. 40% said good or excellent. Again, these are the positive responses. Ease of bus travel, 14. Ease of bicycle travel, 24. Ease of walking, 58. Availability of paths and walking trails, 50. And traffic flow on major streets, 29% rated that as good or excellent. When you look at that compared to the national database, the ease of bicycle travel and ease of walking are similar to other jurisdictions around the country. The others are below the average of the other jurisdictional responses. In transportation, now we're switching to services that the city provides as opposed to characteristics of the community. Street repair, street cleaning, street lighting, and sidewalk maintenance. We are above average, above the average of the database in street cleaning and street lighting, and we are similar in street repair and sidewalk maintenance. Traffic signal timing and bus or transit services, as well as the amount of public parking. You see those numbers there, 47, 23% said good or excellent when it comes to bus or transit services. Amount of public parking, 58%. We are above the national database, with the exception of bus or transit services, where we're below. The NCS does not necessarily analyze or try to explain the results of these surveys, so keep that in mind as well. It is possible, though, based on the ease of bus travel response that we saw earlier in the survey, that this could be have to do with the ease or availability of service as opposed to the quality of the service that we do provide. Based on the other high marks that we get on service providing, that would be my best guess. Have you ridden a local bus in the last 12 months? Basically, nobody has. 96% say they have never ridden a local bus in the last 12 months. A few people said once or twice. On our commuting patterns, I don't think there are any surprises here. 81% of people commute to work alone in their car. 9% have others in the vehicle with them, but approximately 90% of our residents commute to work in motor vehicles. 9% have other ways of getting to work. 8% work at home. Housing was an interesting study. This is the availability of affordable, quality housing. It's interesting that those two adjectives were put together in this characteristic. 7 out of 10 people say they find the availability of affordable, quality housing in Surprise as being either good or excellent. And in terms of the variety of housing options, 77% find that variety good, and we are above the database average in both of those categories.
Ken, did you hear that we were on the Today Show?
No, sir, I had not.
Yeah, Surprise Arizona was focused on the Today Show as a great place to live with affordability. Just this right here.
Huh, what did they use as a source, if you don't mind my asking?
I don't know. It was about 2 weeks ago. I didn't see it. I was told.
We'll have to look into that.
Maybe check into that.
That
will
may
you?
be part of the media trip that we just came off of, because we did have a component, a group of people that went to all the media to talk about, it's not, these aren't foreclosures, these are affordable housing opportunities, workforce housing opportunities, and other things. So maybe that's a result of it.
Yes, that could very well be. Well, the survey certainly bears that out, that the
Okay.
people who live here certainly find that we're well above average in the variety and the availability of affordable, quality housing. This was also an interesting result here. This had to do with experiencing housing cost stress. Anyone who pays more than 30% of income, according to the National Citizen Survey, is experiencing housing cost stress. In our community, 37% of those who responded to the survey said they were paying more than 30%. Therefore, they're considered to be experiencing housing cost stress, and that is about similar with the rest of the country. Land use and zoning, close to 70% of people feel the overall quality of new development in Surprise is excellent or good. The overall appearance of Surprise is very high. 82% of people who participated in the survey found the overall appearance of the city was excellent or good. If you drill down that a little further, you'll find that we were compared to 289 cities with that particular criterion, and we ranked 57th out of 289 with an 82% rank. This is one of the most significantly highest rated characteristics of the community, is the overall appearance of the city. And again, we're above the national database in both of those. Speed of population growth, as you can see here, 53% of people seem to feel the population growth has been too fast, though 40% are somewhat too fast, and 13% say much too fast. In terms of the appearance of the community, 78% of people surveyed said that rundown buildings, weedy lots, junk vehicles are not a major problem in Surprise. That puts us significantly above the database average, where only 5% of people said, 5% of people in Surprise said that these are a major problem. Again, that's a very high ranking for us. Land use, planning, and zoning, 53% of people say it's good or excellent. Code enforcement, 49% say that's good or excellent. Animal control, 69% say that's good or excellent. And those are all above the national database averages. Economic sustainability, this is an area that I addressed very early in the presentation. Only 24% of those who responded said employment opportunities in the city are good or excellent. Shopping opportunities, 51% say those opportunities are good or excellent. In terms of being a place to work, 51% also say good or excellent. And in terms of the overall quality of our establishments, 66% consider them good or excellent. And as you can see, we are either similar to or below the database average in those statistical categories. Rate of retail growth, 48%, again with a plus or minus confidence factor of 5%, feel that the rate of retail growth is too slow, either somewhat or much. When compared to the national database, we are above average in people thinking that the rate of retail growth is too slow. In terms of job growth, there's no question about this. 86% of people surveyed found that the rate of job growth is too slow, and 46% of them said somewhat, 40% said much too slow. That's clearly tilted in one particular direction. In terms of rating of economic development services, we're similar, with 45% of people calling them excellent or good. Economic sustainability, this had to do with how people feel personally about where they're headed in the next 6 months. As you can see, 13% of people responded by saying they are somewhat or very positive about their prospects in the next 6 months. That is lower than the database average of other communities around the country. In terms of public safety, how do you feel after dark and during the day in the downtown area? Again, people had to define this for themselves. I think an educated guess would mean Grand and Bell over into this area of the city. 64% and 86% respectively say they feel very or somewhat safe in these areas during and after dark. In their neighborhoods, that statistic changes to 82 and 92%. Safety from environmental hazards. The only example that the National Citizen Survey gave to help people understand what they were looking for, they identified toxic waste as an environmental hazard. 80% of people said they felt safe from environmental hazards in Surprise. And in terms of being a crime victim, property and violent crime, 2 out of 3 said they felt safe from property crime. 81% said they felt safe from violent crime. As you can see here, in those categories, we are above the average benchmark from the National Research Center, with the exception of after dark, downtown and in the neighborhood. In those categories, we are similar to the national database. This is a particularly interesting one. 7% of people, it's easy to misread this one. This does not mean that 7% of people in the city said they were victims of crime in the last 12 months. What this is anyone in the surveyed household who was a victim was identified as being such. So there was someone in 7% of the households surveyed who was a crime victim in the last 12 months. That is below the database average. Interestingly, though, 93%, and again it's a coincidence that these numbers transpose 7 and 93, 93% of those who were victims reported the crime to the police, and that's well above the national database average. So people clearly feel comfortable communicating with our police department when they're victims of crimes. Here we go directly into the ratings of public safety services. 82% found police services excellent or good. 94% found fire services excellent or good. Ambulance EMS services, 91%, excellent or good. Crime prevention activities, 3 out of 4, excellent or good. And as you can see, we consistently rate above average, with the exception of ambulance and EMS, where we're within 3 points of being similar to the other communities around the country. Continuing on with public safety services, fire prevention is at 80%. Traffic enforcement, 69%. That's a police activity. Municipal court rating is 81%, and I'll go back to that one in just a second. And emergency preparedness is rated at 56%. And again, we are above average, the average database, with the exception of emergency preparedness, where we're similar to. I wanted to mention courts because when I drilled down a little in that, I discovered that the average rating was a 65 for court services. We were compared to 136 cities around the country, and the Surprise City Court System was rated 12th among those 136, which puts us in the top 10% of the cities that were surveyed for court services. And where did my mouse go? There she is. Moving on to environmental sustainability. This is another one that ranked very high. 86% of people think the cleanliness of the community is either excellent or good. That places us 28th out of 123 similar cities surveyed, or pardon me, 123 jurisdictions where a similar question was asked. We're ranked 28th, very close to the top 10% in that. The quality of our overall natural environment, 2 out of 3 people thought that was excellent or good. The way we preserve the natural space we have, such as open space and green belts, 58% responded that was excellent or good. So only 62% of people said our air quality was excellent or good. And that's how we rank against the database in those areas. Recycling, people recycle significantly higher than the national average according to the NRC database here. 62 plus 15 is 77% of people recycle at least once a month. 62% recycle a couple of times a month, and that's well above what the national database reads. People are generally satisfied with the quality of their utility services, some of which we provide, such as the sewer service, some of the drinking water, and the storm drainage. Yard waste pickup, recycling, and garbage collection. Garbage collection rated extremely high as well. You'll notice that, 91%. That is significantly higher, and one of the highest rated services in the city.
Ms. Wolcott.
Could you flip back to the water?
Sure.
Can you drill down in that and give us a little bit more information about that rating?
That drinking water rating? Mm-hmm. Sure. There's a lot of different things. There are a lot of different directions we could go. Why don't we go to the benchmark? Would you give us
Sure.
a rating of other cities? It might take me a second to find it.
Okay.
Drinking water, our average rating was 55. We were compared to 248 jurisdictions around the country, and we're ranked 154th. So 154 out of 248. And where they come up with the similar ranking has to do with the rating itself. The rating is 55.
Did they get to specifics like taste or?
No, they did not. They do have a
with that.
demographic breakdown in terms of, might take me a second to find that. But I don't think I'm going to get to the answer that you're looking for. No, they weren't asked specifically about that.
So any of these items then, for example, if we move on to storm drainage, we're not going to get a specific answer as to why it is that they would rate at 63%.
Correct, because there was not a tree set up like there is in a phone survey. This was just a mail survey. There is a lot of demographic information associated with it. There is age demographic. There is a location in the city demographic.
Okay.
There is how many years you've lived in the city demographic, among others.
Did we see any patterns on the drinking water demographic or location?
It'll take me just a second to find that one, but I can answer that for you pretty quickly. Sorry, it's taking me a little longer than I thought. Drinking water. There is only one statistically significant deviation from the response, and that had to do with whether you own or rent your home. 77% of renters found the water was excellent or good. 61% of homeowners did. There are no statistically significant differences in the way people in the age categories reacted, and no statistically significant difference in the way people who lived here for various lengths of time reacted. The age categories, by the way, are 18 to 34, 35 to 54, and 55 and above.
Okay.
Ken, does it give any locations as far as where that input is being received?
We do have the responses broken down by 3 geographic areas within the city, mostly the retirement communities, which are more or less contiguous, and then 2 areas representing about 50% of the balance of the city each, south of Bell Road, and that information is available in your book. That's a great question. That will give us a little more insight into how people feel about the taste of water from different services. I think we should point out that this is the only service that is consistently subjected to a multi-billion-dollar advertising campaign encouraging you not to drink the water that comes out of your tap. So whether or not that has an effect on how people perceive this service is, again, something we don't know from this data. We'd have to infer that for ourselves. I think we hit on this. We last touched on garbage collection, which, again, is very high. Getting into the recreation category, and we're getting fairly close to the end now. Recreation opportunities were above the national database. Interestingly, people who had used recreation centers were at 57%. This is in the last 12 months. 41% participated in a recreation activity. 81% had visited a city park. And those were either similar to or below the national database. Now, when you drill down on these statistics a little bit, you discover that the younger you are, the much more likely you are to have used the rec centers or participated in a rec activity or visited a neighborhood park. In fact, when you look at those demographics, you get a statistically significant difference between the age groups. For example, in the 18 to 34 age group, 94% have visited a city park, 62% have used a rec center, and 51% have participated in a rec activity.
That's me, guys.
So those clearly decline as you get further along the age categories. Cultural, arts, and education. The opportunities to attend, again, these are community characteristics. 39 and 44% rated cultural activities and educational activities, either excellent or good, and those are below the National Research Center database. Participation in previous year, have you used the Surprise Public Library? 70% say yes. 46% said yes, that they participated in religious or spiritual activities in Surprise. Interestingly, we were similar too in library usage, yet below the statistical or the NRC database in spiritual activity participation. The perception of cultural activities, it's key that this is a perception measure. People did not have objective data by which to make a decision. This is their perception of these services, public schools and the library services. 58% said good or excellent for the schools. That is below the NRC average. 85% said good or excellent for public library services. That is above. In health and wellness, we do very well in the availability of affordable, quality health care. Again, those two terms are used together, and that's important. I want to point that out to Council. Food, also, we do well above the national database average. And in the availability of preventive health services, we do extraordinarily well. Community inclusiveness, 68% of the people said they felt that there was a good or excellent sense of community in the city of Surprise. 79% felt we were open and accepting toward people of diverse backgrounds. 56% thought affordable quality child care was in good shape here. And there you see the comparison with the database. Place to raise kids, this is and a place to retire. These are significant for us because these are qualities of the community that are well known and that which we promote. 80% of people said, or surveyed, said this was an excellent or good place to raise children. 81% of those surveyed said this was a good or excellent place to retire. The place to raise children we ranked similar to the national average. Place to retire we ranked above. Now again, this does require, when you drill down a little bit, you discover an interesting fact about this particular statistic. Those with young children, that is the age group from 18 to 34, 93% of them said that Surprise is a good place to raise children. People in the 35 to 54 age bracket who would have older children, either teens or maybe college-age kids, they were the lowest category. There was 71% of them said Surprise was a good or excellent place to raise kids. Again, I'm not in the analysis business, but one thing that strikes me is we know we hear from our police department that the teens and late teens, when they get calls about kids in the green areas, often the kids say, there's no place else for us to go, we've got nothing to do. That could have something to do with the satisfaction of the householder who filled out the survey of those older kids. But again, for the young families, 93% consider Surprise a good or excellent place to raise a family. In our services to our seniors, our young people, and our low-income community, we are above the national database averages. Civic engagement, something I know all of us have a great interest in. First, they asked for the use of city information sources in the last 12 months. 89% of those surveyed said they have read the Surprise Progress magazine. Amazing. 68% have visited the city website in the last 12 months. Both of those are above the National Research Center averages. Cable television, that would be Channel 11. 72% of those consider that service good or excellent. 73% consider overall public information services good or excellent. Those are both above the National Research Center averages. Civic activity, this is the opportunity, again, this is a measure of community characteristics, not services. The opportunity to volunteer, the opportunity to participate in community matters, we are similar to other cities around the country, with 3 out of 4 saying the volunteer opportunities are good or excellent, 63% saying that the opportunities to participate in the community are good or excellent. 46% of those asked, similar to other cities around the country, have watched a meeting of local public officials on cable television. 21% have attended a meeting. And again, as you might expect when you drill down into the age demographics particularly, you start to see significant statistical differences there. 30% have volunteered time to a group or an activity. 24% have participated in a club or civic group. And 90% have helped provide help to a friend or a neighbor. Interestingly, we are below the National Research Center database averages in all of those categories. Amazing. Ratings of social engagement opportunities, again, this is a community characteristic. the opportunity to participate in social events, and the opportunities to participate in religious and spiritual events and activities, we are similar to other cities around the country in those. Kind of a measure of neighborliness. How often do you talk or visit with the people who live on your street next to you? 83% at least once a month, 17% less than once a month, and we are similar to other cities in the database in that regard. 82% of those who responded to the survey are registered to vote. That's, of course, higher than the average bear. I think that, though, is what to expect for people who would take the time to participate in a survey like this. They tend to be engaged and involved residents, and 81% of them voted in the last general election. That's above the National Research Center database. Public trust. We're moving toward the end of the presentation now. 73% of people surveyed said that the overall image and reputation of the city of Surprise was good or excellent. 55% say the value of services for the taxes they pay is good or excellent. And the overall direction the city is taking, 58% say it is good or excellent. We are above the National Research Center average in all of those. An interesting point to note, when you look at the overall direction statistic, there is a statistically significant difference in age groups. The group that feels most strongly that the city is moving in the right direction are those between the age of 18 and 34. 63% of them say that they somewhat or strongly agree with that statement. The lowest rated group in terms of whether the city direction is correct is the 55-plus age group. 43% of that cohort thinks that the city's overall direction is good or excellent. And in your books, by the way, there is shading in the demographic categories that indicate a statistically significant difference, so those are highlighted for you. And as I mentioned to a few of the members earlier today, we just received the final report, which is in color, and I'll be sure that each of you gets a report in color, which makes this much easier to comprehend. Moving along, the job that the city does at welcoming citizen involvement and the job the city does at listening to its citizens, you see the statistics there. The ranking compared to other cities in the database shows that we are above the average in that. This is a particularly significant one, and I'll explain why in just a minute as we get close to wrapping up. For one thing, it's an extraordinarily positive one. This is how people rate our services compared with other governmental agencies or governmental levels. 74% think city services generally are good or excellent, compared to 38% for the federal government, 34% for the state, 47% for the county. I think this is significant, particularly since I think all of us are aware of the Pew Research Center study that came out late last week. It got quite a bit of attention, that trust in federal government is at an all-time low. That may be reflected in the statistic we see here, but nevertheless, the judgment of the people, of the participants who took this on the services provided by the city is quite high and higher than the NRC average. The proportion of residents who had contact with city employees in the previous 12 months is lower than average. 44% of the people did have contact with city employees. Those who did, though, found their knowledge of what they were doing was good or excellent, 83%. Responsiveness was very high. Courtesy of city employees was very high. Their overall impression of city employees was also very high. We are above the NRC database in all of those categories, so clearly our employees make an excellent impression and do a good job in the community. Just about finished. Again, just to remind you, there were 8 broad categories in which these results were clustered. The 5 that you see with arrows relate directly to the services the city provides. The other 3 are more about city characteristics as opposed to services. The 5 service categories, you see them there. When you take those 5 service categories and place in them all of the services that were measured by the survey, you get a graph that looks like this. The green means we were above the average in those areas. The yellow means we were similar to. There are no reds, which indicate below the benchmark averages. I had one person ask me, where is transportation in these? That's an excellent question. Transportation was considered a community characteristic for the purposes of the survey, ease of bus travel, ease of moving around the city, et cetera. The transportation services that the city provides are included in here. They are kind of scattered about. You'll see street cleaning is here. traffic enforcement is here. Street lighting is here, et cetera, traffic signal timing. So the services that we do provide in transportation are included in this matrix. The keys represent what the survey analysts call the key driver analysis. I want to talk about that for just a minute. By the way, there are other breakouts that I mentioned to you. They are geographic in nature, and the demographic breakouts by age, et cetera, we mentioned to you as well. I want to talk a little about key driver analysis before we get to the results of the policy questions. A key driver analysis is a statistical comparison between the quality of the services the city provides and the overall impression that people gave of the city of Surprise. And when you look at those comparisons, they try to identify services which, if emphasized, have the best chance of predicting that in the future people will rate the city positively. It sounds a little vague. Let me give you an example. People will often say that the reason they choose a particular airline is because it's a safe airline to fly in. But key driver analysis reveals that price and frequent flyer perks are actually what will predict their buying behavior in the future. They perform this key driver analysis for us and for the other municipalities in which they survey. They vary by city. In Chandler, for example, healthcare, public information services, and preserving open space were the key drivers. Again, the indication was if those services are emphasized, the chances are good in the future people will be generally satisfied with the quality of the community. In Peoria, police services, sewer services, and preserving open space were significant. In Surprise, they've identified street cleaning and preservation of open space as the key drivers that will generally predict that people in the future will, in an overall sense, be satisfied with the quality of the community. With that, we get into the areas of the particular policy questions. Would you be likely or unlikely to use a bus service throughout the city? And I apologize that the slides aren't coming up right now. 72% of those people said they would be very or somewhat unlikely to use a local bus service in the city. 66% said they would be very or somewhat unlikely to pay a fee to ride a local bus in the city. On the flip side of that, 56% of those surveyed said they would be very likely or somewhat likely to use commuter rail along Grand to a light rail connection in downtown Phoenix if they could leave their vehicle at the Surprise parking lot. And when you look at the somewhats and varies in there, 35% said they would be very likely, 21% said they would be somewhat likely to use commuter rail if it were available. Finally, let's see, we talked about key driver analysis, and I reviewed with you the other breakouts. I'm sorry I've taken so much time on this, and if you have any questions or comments that we can delve into, please, now's the time to ask. It's a very comprehensive report. I know it's a lot of information. I think we'll all be digesting it for quite some time to come.
Ms. Wolcott.
Thank you. I'd heard previously that transportation had risen to a top priority for our city. Can you point to specific parts of the report that can kind of give us a little bit more enhanced information about the deficits that people identify as a problem?
Sure. If we go to the open-ended question part of the report, again, that particular question was an open-ended one. Mm-hmm. So they took all of the answers that people formulated on their own. They didn't have choices to select from. They were just more or less spontaneous responses, and they grouped those. And the grouping of transportation, 46% of respondents said that transportation improvements would help them make a decision to become long-term residents of Surprise. In particular, they talked about traffic congestion, the lack of public transit, and the lack of a good east-west corridor, which goes back to traffic movement. Mm-hmm. That was 46%. There was quite a bit of drop-off between that and the second selection, which was better and more retail, restaurants, and a mall. and that's 30% of people responded to that. So again, 46% transportation, 30% more and better retail, 20% asked for more economic development job opportunities. So transportation, various improvements, better, more retail, restaurants in a mall, and economic development, employment were the top three, followed closely by number 4 at 18%, recreation and cultural opportunities, which were identified throughout as a lack. I think we all perceived that. One thing I should point out, too, as we're talking about this particular question, when you look at it, you'll see public safety is pretty high on there. But when you drill down to the specific responses, and those are available, you can read what people actually wrote. What they're saying is, please continue to support and keep public safety as a priority. They're not citing it as a lack or something that needs improvement.
It's good to know. Thank you. Any other questions?
I was a lot of this survey confirmed some things that I thought kind of intuitively, but I was surprised by the volunteer component. I mean, we always pride ourselves as a volunteer city. How many sun dancers do we have? 900 or something? 700. And all the commissions we got were people volunteer, but I guess we're not.
There's a lot of material to chew on. Now, interestingly, the best way to make use of this data over the long run is to do this every other year.
Yeah.
And the costs are not significant. The National Citizen Survey operates through ICMA, the International City Managers Association. The cost for this initial survey was less than $10,000. With the addition of the policy questions and the open-ended questions, the total cost of the survey was $13,400. Because in the future, Councilman, we would have the ability to compare our volunteerism with our volunteerism, because we will have a baseline here in 2010 that in 2012 we can go back and say, well, you know, we've either improved or declined in terms of how people perceive the opportunities to volunteer. Because there were two questions. One was the opportunity, and one was, have you actually done it? Yeah. And in both of those, we were either similar to or below the national averages.
I get street sweeping, but I don't get the other one.
Preservation of open areas is complex, and it's not something that anybody at less than a PhD level with the understanding of multiple regressive analysis can even begin to comprehend. I will say this, though, if you look at the services that were rated very highly, which were cleanliness of the community and overall appearance of the community, and the fact that garbage pickup was rated at 91%,
right,
which was
right.
one of the highest ratings that we have.
That didn't surprise me. I've got great feedback from people about our garbage.
I think what the key driver analysis is showing is that these services indicate the value that people place on a clean and a beautifully appearing community. Mm-hmm. And then they're saying, well, when you look at that value that the community's placed, and then you compare it to how people say we're doing in terms of preserving open space and natural areas, and we're so-so compared to the national database, I think their conclusion is, and this is my own analysis of the data, is that if you emphasize that as a policy, again, the idea of key driver analysis is to predict future behavior. They're saying if you emphasize that as a policy, as an allocation of resources, that will best predict how people will, that is a good predictor that people will react favorably overall in the future. That's what I think, that's my analysis of what they're trying to say there.
Yeah.
On the street cleaning, Ken, just for clarification, that's non-specific, though. That could mean multiple things depending on who's interpreting that question. So it just, cleanliness, is it more tied into that?
Well, yes and no. What they do is they take that list of city services, which I believe is question 11 on the survey, and that includes street cleaning.
Right.
And then they compare it to the overall ranking of the city. And as you saw, 74% of people think that the overall quality of the city services are good or excellent. They look at the relationships between the services and the overall result, and that's one of the things they identified, that specific service.
Right, and just making sense out of the key driver component of it. Yeah. It goes back to, you know, even tied into that public safety component where, you know, reports are very high. Well, that goes into the culture that we've created with Block Watch and reporting things, and that increases the safety and the security of residents, and it all kind of ties into that whole theme of a clean, safe community. And that's the key driver. All those components tied into that.
I've got to agree with that. You know, when I first saw this, I was a little, not exactly puzzled, but I thought, I need to take a closer look at that. But when you really study it, you start to see subtly how that emerged.
Right.
It actually is a pretty subtle conclusion that they've come to in terms of their key drivers.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
We'll move to item number 3, call for public input regarding agendized items. I would invite anybody from the public that would like to speak on either items number 1 or 2 to step forward at this time. Seeing no one, I close the call to the public and adjourn this meeting.